They're back again. The COP summits, year after year, they feel like a massive exercise in hypocrisy, and COP29 is no exception. Leaders, corporate elites, and the activists all fly in their private jets to preach about reducing carbon emissions. The irony is almost laughable. Those lecturing the rest of us about climate responsibility are often the ones racking up the largest carbon footprints. You've got politicians and CEOs and heads of industries driving the worst pollution, jetting off to fancy venues where they put on a show of caring about the planet. Meanwhile, ordinary people are bearing the brunt of their policies and decisions, facing rising costs and restricted freedoms in the name of green initiatives. It's almost laughable. And this year, COP29, so there's been 29 of these damn things, we're expected to buy into yet another round of grand promises and far-off targets. But as history shows, these pledges rarely turn into any form of meaningful action. They'll make grand announcements, but back home, it's business as usual for the big polluters. It's almost like an elite club, a green-tinted PR exercise that allows them to dodge responsibility whilst placing the burden on the rest of us. Real change starts with integrity, not with global summits that are little more than high carbon, high cost photo opportunities. It's so ironic, and it's becoming increasingly clear that the climate agenda is less about saving the planet and more about controlling the people. In recent years, there's been a growing chorus of voices urging us to radically change our way of life, all under the guise of saving the environment. But when you peel back the layers, a very different picture emerges, one that shows a concerted push by global elites to amass unprecedented levels of control, influence, and wealth. They call it a climate emergency, but make no mistake, it's a power grab. That's plain and that's simple. It's clear to see. Climate change, yes, of course it's real. Of course, the planet has always experienced temperature fluctuations. The idea that the Earth's temperature has been consistent for millennia is simply untrue. Historical evidence points to natural climate variability over centuries, from the medieval warm period to the Little Ice Age. Yet, the climate crusaders ignore these factors and instead insist that today's shifts are solely due to human activity, pushing the narrative that catastrophe is around the corner, unless, of course, we bow down to their will. Let's look at the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Very long-winded. Now, they claim to be the definitive authority on climate science, but if you dig a bit deeper, and you'll find that their conclusions are actually heavily politicized. IPCC reports have been repeatedly adjusted to fit the narrative that climate change is an impending disaster, conveniently justifying drastic interventions that would reshape global economies and centralize power. And who benefits? You've got to ask yourself that. The very elites, of course, the ones that are pushing this agenda, they're the ones that benefit. The billionaires, the bureaucrats, celebrities, all lining up to tell us how to live our lives, all whilst they continue to live theirs in the utmost luxury. They arrive in private jets to climate conferences where they dictate the rules for everyone else, asking us to cut down on driving, eat less meat, and reduce our energy consumption. Hypocrisy doesn't even begin to cover it. Their actions make it clear that these rules are meant for the masses, but not for them, of course. I mean, they, of course, shouldn't be bound by that. Then there's the excuse for carbon taxes. The solution now to climate change, we're told, is to tax carbon emissions and penalise anyone who doesn't adhere to strict environmental guidelines. This isn't about saving the planet. It's about lining governmental coffers and creating a new market for the wealthy elite to exploit. Carbon credits, an invention of this climate agenda. It's ridiculous, which allows wealthy people to buy and sell the right to pollute, whilst ordinary people are forced to pay more and more for basic necessities like heating and fuel. The rich can simply pay their way out of environmental guilt. And who profits from these schemes? Once again, corporations, financial institutions, all the ones who've created a market around trading carbon credits, a modern day indulgence, letting the wealthy wash their hands of any so-called sin. Oh, now, the climate agenda is a Trojan horse for more centralised power. We're witnessing the slow erosion of national sovereignty as governments all around the world increasingly submit to international climate agreements, essentially ceding control of their policies to unaccountable global bodies. Think about the Paris Agreement, an arrangement where countries commit to reducing emissions, but with vastly different standards for developed versus developing nations. These agreements effectively shut or shift power away from elected officials and into the hands of a global elite who then dictate the policies that affect us all, regardless of economic impact on everyday citizens. A bit like what's happening at COP. Meanwhile, renewable energy is touted as the miracle solution to our climate woes, but it's nothing of the sort. Wind and solar are, well, frankly, they're unreliable. They require backup sources to provide consistent power. Batteries that store renewable energy are not only extremely costly, but rely on rare earth minerals, which are primarily mined in countries with little regard for environmental or labour standards. And this demand for these rare minerals fuels exploitation in countries like the Democratic Republic of Congo, where child labour is rampant in mining and all these kind of things. But yet, nobody's talking about that. These so-called clean energy sources come with the hidden costs that proponents would rather not talk about. But why would they? For them, green energy is just another way to monopolise power and influence. And it's all about control. Consider the push for electric vehicles or EVs. We're told that these are environmentally friendly alternatives to traditional cars. Yet, the environmental cost of producing lithium-ion batteries is staggering. The mining process for lithium, cobalt and nickel, which are essential for these batteries, is destructive to ecosystems and pollutes water supplies. But the global elites pushing the climate agenda ignore these issues because electric vehicles offer them another opportunity to control us. Imagine a future where your car's battery life or charging speed is controlled by government policy or by the whims of corporations. That's not freedom, it's coercion, cleverly disguised as progress. Furthermore, the narrative that fossil fuels are evil is misleading. Fossil fuels have powered industrial development and they've lifted billions of people out of poverty. Without them, modern society would look very different. The rush to eliminate fossil fuels entirely rather than seeking a balanced approach to energy that includes both traditional and renewable sources risks economic disaster. Countries that rely too heavily on renewables have already seen the consequences. I mean, let's take Germany's energy crisis, for instance. Well, this has led to skyrocketing electricity costs and a return to coal for stability. I mean, how ironic is that? At the heart of the climate agenda lies the notion of social engineering. The goal is not merely to address environmental issues, but to reshape society according to the whims of globalist ideologues. They envisage a world where we live in tiny homes, consume less and less, and accept a lower standard of living. We're encouraged to avoid owning a car and instead rely on public transport. Get out of it! Meat is demonized in favour of plant-based diets, despite the fact that millions of people around the world rely on livestock for their livelihoods. It's about limiting individual freedoms and making us dependent on a system controlled by the few. And let's not forget the role of the media. And I say this, and I mean mainstream outlets, the established media, who have fully embraced the climate narrative, painting anyone who questions the agenda as a climate denier. It's the same tactic that they used with COVID-19 to suppress dissent, marginalize skeptics, and promote one-sided information. To be honest, they got me hook, line, and sinker. These media campaigns are carefully curated, showing us only the most extreme weather events, whilst ignoring natural climate variability. The hysteria is manufactured to create a sense of crisis and urgency, enabling policy changes that would otherwise be unthinkable. Now, I'm not saying that we shouldn't have locked down and some of the things in COVID were incorrect. What I'm saying is they used fear. Ultimately, though, the climate agenda is a power grab by global elites masquerading as concern for the planet. They claim to be acting in the public's best interests, but their actions betray their true motivations. It's a carefully constructed narrative that uses fear to push ordinary people into compliance, all while the rich and powerful live by a completely different set of rules, by centralizing power under the banner of saving the planet. They aim to reshape our societies in their image with less freedom, fewer opportunities, and far more control for them. So let's not be fooled. Environmental stewardship is essential, but it should be done on our terms, not dictated to by a global elite with ulterior motives. It's time to question the climate agenda, look past the propaganda, and hold these elites accountable for their actions. The real climate crisis isn't happening in the atmosphere, it's happening in the boardroom, where those in power are plotting to profit at our expense. And don't forget to subscribe to the GB News YouTube channel. Details just there.